She laughed when she told me to clear the tables. She didn't know I owned the hotel, the foundation, or the truth about the man whose hand kept finding her back. One of us was about to lose everything that night, and it wasn't me. Viewers, before you continue, please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories. My name is Brooks Fobbs. I'm 41, and until tonight, almost nobody at this gala knew what I actually do for a living. I own 4 hotels across Denver, a catering company that caters half the weddings in this city, and the very building we're standing in right now, the Ridgeline Grand. My wife, Stella Brooks, thinks I run some kind of consulting firm. That's the story I let her believe 3 years ago, back when we were still new enough that I wanted to know if she loved me or the number in my bank account. I never got around to correcting her. Maybe I should have. I built this from nothing. 15 years ago I was divorced, broke, and running a food truck outside a stadium parking lot, counting quarters to make rent. Nobody remembers that version of me anymore, but I do. It's the reason I still flinch a little when people assume money like mine was inherited instead of earned one exhausting shift at a time. Tonight Stella insisted we attend this charity gala together, dressed me down for wearing the wrong suit, and reminded me twice in the car that these were her people, not mine. I let it go. I always let it go. It's easier than explaining who actually signs the checks that make evenings like this possible. We walked into the ballroom under gold light and string quartet music, and I watched my wife transform the second she crossed the threshold, her voice rising an octave, her hand finding the forearm of every donor within reach. Somewhere behind the kitchen doors, my events coordinator, Priya, was already watching me with an expression I recognized. She knew who I was. She also knew I hadn't told anyone else. I had no idea, standing there in that overpriced tuxedo, that within the hour my wife would hand me a stack of dirty dessert plates in front of her friends and tell me to make myself useful. I set the plates down on the counter and picked up the next stack without a word. Stella didn't look back at me once. She was laughing with a woman in emerald green, the kind of laugh she used to save for me. I remembered the early years, before the gala circuit, when she'd fall asleep on my shoulder in a rented apartment above a laundromat, before any of this money existed between us. That version of her wouldn't have handed me a plate like she was tipping a waiter. A hotel manager named Walt caught my eye from the far end of the room and froze mid-stride, his tray tilting slightly in his hands. I gave him a small shake of my head, the same signal I'd given 3 other staff members already tonight. Don't say anything. Not yet. I wanted to see how far Stella would take this before I stepped in, if I stepped in at all. She'd been doing this more lately, small tests of what I'd tolerate. Comments about my suit, my car, the logistics job she introduced me with to anyone who mattered. I used to think it was insecurity. Standing there with a stack of dessert plates balanced against my forearm, I started to wonder if it was something closer to contempt. Behind me, through the pass-through window, I could see the kitchen crew moving fast, plating the next course. My chef, Marisol, glanced up and did a double take when she recognized the man in the wrinkled tuxedo jacket carrying dirty china through her kitchen. She didn't say my name. She just watched, waiting for an explanation I wasn't ready to give. I carried the plates through the swinging door myself. Stella never turned around to check where I'd gone. She was already on to her next conversation, already performing for a room full of people who had no idea whose building they were standing in. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things that night, and almost none of them turned out to be true by morning. Priya found me by the walk-in cooler, arms crossed, refusing to hand me an apron even though I'd already reached for one hanging by the door. She'd worked for me for 6 years, first as an events assistant, now running every gala this hotel hosted. She was the only person on staff who'd ever seen me without a tie, back when I used to help load in tables myself just to remember what the job felt like from the ground up. "Mr. Fobbs, welcome back," she said, too loudly, the words slipping out before she caught herself. A line cook near the stove glanced up. I raised a hand and she stopped talking immediately, though her jaw stayed tight with everything she wasn't saying. She knew why I never came to these events as myself. She also clearly thought tonight was the wrong night to keep pretending. I told her to let it go, just for another hour. She didn't argue, but she didn't look happy about it either. Priya had opinions about Stella that she never voiced directly, only in the careful way she avoided saying her name, the way she'd once described the Foundation Gala seating chart as creative, when Stella had insisted her own table be closest to the stage. Through the small round window in the kitchen door, I watched the ballroom the way you'd watch a stage before the curtain drops on something you already suspect is going wrong. Stella was radiant under the chandeliers, the exact version of herself she became whenever cameras or money were nearby. I built this room. I chose the marble, argued with the architect over the ceiling height, sat through 11 months of construction delays. And I was standing on the other side of a swinging door, unseen, in an apron. Priya touched my sleeve before I walked back out with another tray. "You sure about this?" she asked. I wasn't, not entirely. But some part of me needed to see how the night unfolded if nobody warned her that the man clearing her tables owned the entire room. I carried the tray back out and set it near the dessert station, and that's when Stella spotted the stack of dirty plates piling up by the kitchen pass-through. She turned to me with the easy authority of someone who'd never once had to ask for anything twice in her life. "Make yourself useful," she said, loud enough for the two women beside her to hear, and she laughed, the light kind of laugh that tells everyone around you it's fine to laugh too. Her friends laughed. I picked up the plates. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It wasn't rage, not right away. It was closer to watching myself from outside my own body, wondering how we'd arrived at a moment where my wife thought clearing dishes was an appropriate joke to make about her husband in a room full of strangers. I thought about her mother, a woman I'd met only twice, both times watching her stand quietly behind Stella's father at dinner parties, never once offered a chair at the head of the table. Stella told me once, years ago, after too much wine, that she'd sworn she would never be that woman. I didn't understand then how far she'd go to prove it, or who she'd be willing to step on to avoid it. I balanced the plates against my forearm and walked toward the kitchen doors, past a table of donors discussing a wing of the children's hospital my foundation had quietly funded 2 years earlier. None of them knew that either. Stella had already turned back to her conversation, satisfied, unaware that the plates in my hands were made from china I'd personally selected from a catalog 8 months ago, back when I still thought impressing her mattered more than it should have. The doors swung shut behind me. Somewhere past them, a text lit up Stella's phone screen, and she angled it away from the table before anyone else could see the name, tucking it into her clutch with a practiced motion I would only understand the meaning of later. Back in the kitchen, Marisol nearly dropped a tray of seared scallops when she turned and saw me standing there in a borrowed apron, dirty plates stacked against my chest. She'd been my head chef for 4 years, hired her away from a hotel in Austin with a salary that made her laugh out loud at the offer. "Sir, what are you?" she started, and I lifted a hand the same way I had with Priya, the same way I had with Walt. "Not yet." She set the tray down slowly, studying me like she was trying to solve a math problem that didn't add up. I told her it was fine, that I just wanted to see something play out, and she gave me the look every good employee eventually gives the person signing their checks, quiet disbelief, followed by quiet compliance. I set the plates in the bus tub and leaned against the steel counter for a moment, letting the noise of the kitchen wash over me, the hiss of the range, the clatter of a dropped ladle, the low radio somebody had going near the walk-in. It was louder in here than in the ballroom, but somehow it felt like the only honest room in the building. Through the small window in the door, I could see Stella at her table, laughing at something a man beside her had said. I didn't recognize him at first. Dark suit, wine glass held a little too casually, his hand resting on the back of her chair like it belonged there. I asked Marisol if she knew who he was. She glanced through the glass and shrugged. "Some wine guy Stella's been bringing around for the last few events. Consulting, I think she said." I'd heard that word from Stella before, months ago, about a consulting project that required late dinners and out-of-town trips I never asked enough questions about. Standing in that kitchen in a borrowed apron, watching a stranger's hand linger on my wife's chair like he'd done it before, I finally started asking them, quietly, one after another. His name, I learned later, was Callum Reyes, a wine importer who'd been supplying 3 of my restaurants for the better part of a year without either of us realizing we shared a wife's phone contacts. He and Stella met at a business mixer downtown, one she described to me at the time as a girls' trip to Scottsdale. I remembered believing her without a second thought, the way you believe someone you've never had a reason to doubt. Watching them now through the kitchen door's small window, I understood the shape of what had actually happened. Not a single dramatic betrayal, but a slow accumulation of small ones. Dinners that ran late. A consulting project that somehow required matching luggage tags. Texts she started angling away from me around the same time she started asking whether I still found her interesting, a question I'd always answered honestly, never once suspecting it was a test for someone else's benefit. Callum leaned in and said something that made Stella laugh, really laugh, in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. His hand found the small of her back, resting there with a familiarity that told its own story. Nobody at the table seemed to notice, not the senator's wife, not the foundation board member 2 seats down. Only me, watching from the wrong side of a swinging door in an apron that smelled like garlic and butter. I thought about the first year we were married, when Stella used to complain that men like her father only valued women who made themselves small and agreeable. She said she wanted a partner, not an audience. I'd believed her completely. Standing there, I wondered when exactly complaining about one kind of man had turned into becoming comfortable with another kind of lie, and whether she'd even noticed the shift happening in herself. Priya touched my elbow again, gentler this time. "You've seen enough," she said quietly, almost like a warning. I hadn't, not quite yet, and some part of me suspected the worst of it was still coming. Priya didn't ask my permission for what happened next. I found out about her plan the same moment everyone else in that ballroom did. She walked up to the small stage set up for the evening's thank yous, took the microphone from the foundation's program director mid-transition, and said, in a voice that carried clean across the room, "Before we continue, I'd like to properly welcome someone. The owner of the Ridgeline Grand, and the founder of tonight's foundation, is here with us this evening. Please welcome Mr. Brooks Fobbs." I was still holding a dish towel when the applause started. I stepped through the kitchen doors in the same wrinkled tuxedo jacket, the apron gone, dish soap still drying on my hands, and walked into a spotlight that had clearly been rigged for someone in a much better suit. The applause rose, uncertain at first, then genuine, then loud. I saw the confusion ripple across the room in real time, donors turning to each other, whispering, recalculating everything they thought they knew about the man who'd been clearing their dessert plates 20 minutes earlier. Stella's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do before, an expression caught between disbelief and the beginning of real fear, the kind that arrives right before you understand exactly how much you've misjudged a situation. Callum was faster than she was. By the time I found her eyes across the room, his chair was already empty, his jacket gone from the back of it, his wine glass abandoned half full on the tablecloth. I watched him slip toward the exit near the coat check, moving with the particular calm of a man who'd clearly rehearsed leaving a room quickly before. Stella hadn't moved. She was still holding her glass, still frozen under the chandelier light, watching me the way you watch a building you thought was solid start to shift beneath your feet, one you suddenly realize you never actually owned any part of, no matter how long you'd spent believing otherwise, no matter how sure you'd been standing in it. She found me near the coat check 12 minutes later, her heels loud against the marble, her voice already sharp before she'd fully closed the distance between us. "Why would you humiliate me like that?" she said, not really a question. "You let me stand up there and hand you dirty plates in front of everyone I know." I asked her, calmly, how long she'd been consulting with Callum Reyes. The question landed the way a question only lands when someone already suspects the answer will hurt them. Her face changed before she could stop it, a fast flicker of panic quickly smoothed back into practiced composure, the same performance she'd been giving all night to a room full of strangers. "That's not what this is about," she said, which told me everything the actual answer would have. I hadn't planned to bring it up so directly. I'd told myself I would wait, gather more, be certain before I said anything. But standing there under the dim hallway lighting, gold wallpaper glowing behind her, watching her mascara start to blur at the corner of one eye, I realized I'd been certain for 3 weeks already. I'd hired someone to confirm it, quietly, the same week she'd started angling her phone away from me at dinner. What I hadn't been certain of, until tonight, was whether her contempt for me had ever really been about class, about suits and cars and the word logistics. Watching her face now, I understood it had never been about any of that. It had been about him, about a version of herself she preferred when she was standing next to someone else's attention instead of mine. "You've been investigating me," she said, her voice dropping, and for the first time all evening she sounded less angry than afraid. "I've been paying attention," I said. "Which is more than I can say for you." She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. Her silence answered it clearly enough, and standing there in that hallway, we both understood exactly what was coming next, whether either of us was ready for it or not. Priya found us in the hallway a few minutes later, carrying a slim folder I recognized because I'd asked her to bring it if the night went the direction it had gone. She handed it to me without a word and stepped back, giving us just enough space to pretend she wasn't still within earshot. I told Stella the foundation board had voted, 3 days ago, to rename the scholarship fund currently carrying her name. Effective immediately. It was the project she'd built her entire social identity around for the last 2 years, the one she mentioned at every dinner party, every donor call, every interview with the local paper. I watched the news land somewhere behind her eyes, watched her calculate, in real time, exactly how much of her public self was about to disappear along with it. Then I opened the folder and handed her the second set of papers. Divorce filings, already drafted, our finances already separated months earlier through the trust I'd quietly restructured the week the investigators' report came back. I hadn't wanted to act rashly. I'd wanted, instead, to be certain, and to be protected, before I ever said a word to her about any of it. "You've been planning this," she said, and this time there was no performance left in her voice at all, just something smaller and more honest underneath it. "I've been preparing," I said. "There's a difference, and I think you know it." She didn't reach for the folder right away. Her hand hovered over it the way you hover over something you already know will confirm the worst version of events, the one you'd been telling yourself couldn't possibly be true. When she finally touched it, her fingers were shaking, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her, before I remembered the dessert plates, the laughter, Callum's hand resting on the small of her back like he'd earned the right to put it there. I didn't feel triumphant standing in that hallway. I just felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, completely clear about what came next. 6 months passed the way most hard things do, slower than you'd expect at the start, faster than you'd expect by the end. The divorce settled quietly, without the drawn-out fight I'd braced myself for. Stella's attorney tried to argue for more than the prenup allowed, but the paperwork I'd finalized weeks before the gala held up exactly as intended. She kept her car, her jewelry, and very little else that mattered. I run the Ridgeline under my own name now, no separate consulting story, no version of myself I have to explain away at dinner. Priya took over as VP of Operations that same month, a promotion she'd earned long before that night but never asked for outright. She still brings up the microphone incident occasionally, half apologizing, half not really meaning it, and I've stopped pretending I minded. I heard, secondhand, through a mutual friend who still talks to Stella, that Callum lost interest almost exactly when her name stopped opening the doors it used to. He'd been drawn to the version of her that came with a foundation gala and a husband people assumed was beneath her. Once that version disappeared, so did he, quickly, without much ceremony, the same way he'd left the ballroom the night everything unraveled. I don't feel triumphant about any of it, not really. Mostly I feel lighter, the particular relief of finally not having to shrink myself to keep somebody else comfortable. I built this hotel with my own hands, in a manner of speaking, argued over the marble, sat through the delays, and for a long time I let someone stand in the middle of it and treat me like the help. I won't make that mistake again, not with the next person, not with anyone. Last week Priya mentioned, almost in passing, that Callum's new fiancée looked familiar to her, though she couldn't place why. She described her, casually, a woman from Nashville, dark hair, sharp instincts for reading a room. I didn't recognize the description at first. Then I remembered exactly who she was, and I understood this story wasn't quite finished yet. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories.